Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced the disbanding of Israel's war cabinet earlier today. This comes just over a week after opposition leader Benny Gantz withdrew from the group. The cabinet was formed in the aftermath of the October 7th terror attacks by Hamas. Decision-making will now move back to the government's main security cabinet, according to an Israeli official. Well, the move comes as Mr. Netanyahu expresses frustration over a new IDF policy of a daily tactical pause to allow more aid into Gaza. That pause reportedly began on Saturday and will take place every day from 8 a.m. until 7 p.m. local time until further notice to allow aid trucks to move from the Kerem Shalom crossing. Well, there does seem to be an awful lot of internal confusion in Israel. Tonight we ask, is Prime Minister Netanyahu losing control? Well, here to help us unpack this is Alon Pinkas. He's the former Israeli Consul General in New York. What do you make of what we have seen in the past 24 to 48 hours, sir?
Chaos, Becky, just like you described it, a loss of control. Look, the disbanding of the war cabinet in and of itself is not a dramatic thing, because the war cabinet did not have, will not have any constitutional, statutory authority and powers. It was just a convenient consultative body that was set up by Mr. Netanyahu in the panic and disorientation that ensued October 7th. It was less proactive in the positive sense and more useful in that it prevented several reckless policies from being implemented. So the fact that it was disbanded, and as you correctly pointed out, in the aftermath of, or against the background of Mr. Gantz's withdrawal from the government, means very little. What it does mean is that Mr. Netanyahu has now been deprived of the political shield and protective aura over him. He now owns not only the debacle of October 7th, and the prosecution and the management of the war, but the weeks ahead, which leads us to your second question or point that you made, Becky, and that is this, that his reservations about this pause or hiatus. This is not something that the military decided on its own volition. This is his approval. This is based on his consent. He knew about this. That he now is playing this disingenuous, oh my God, I didn't know about this, is absolutely astonishing.
And there are those who suggest a similar sort of framing when Benjamin Netanyahu talks about the potential for a ceasefire, at least a temporary ceasefire in the first phase, and then a further permanent ceasefire, which is a proposal put on the table by the US president, calling it an Israeli proposal. There's real confusion as to whether Benjamin Netanyahu and those close to him have actually signed up for that. Again, is there some disingenuous sort of positioning going on the part of Netanyahu as far as that ceasefire proposal is concerned?
Yeah, exactly that, Becky. I mean, it's it's unfortunate for me as an Israeli to admit to this, but this has been duplicitous and deceitful and mendacious. He basically rejected Israel's own offer, which sounds like George Orwell's 1984, but it's actually Mr. Netanyahu's 2024. Yes, he agreed on condition with stipulations and prerequisites to the first phase. But the stumbling block is the end of the war, which President Biden 2 weeks ago, or 16 days ago indeed, presented. That phase 2 means the permanent cessation of hostility. To that, Mr. Netanyahu will not agree, which means essentially that there's no deal to be made. No ceasefire, no hostage deal, no nothing.
Let me get back to this disbanding of this war cabinet. Now that decisions for the war will sit with the security cabinet, what does that mean with regard whose voice will be loudest when it comes to decision making?
It's going to be Mr. Netanyahu's. Whether people like it or not, he's going to be the sole arbiter. The laconic statement said that while the war cabinet is being dissolved or disbanded, and powers or authority goes to the security cabinet, which is constitutionally the body that is authorized to make decisions, Mr. Netanyahu, quote unquote, will consult intimate and smaller forms, quote unquote. That means that he will do whatever he wants, which is fine, except for one thing. There's no balancing act. There's no countervailing views being aired, because the entire cabinet right now consists of right-wing extremists, himself included, by the way.
So, yet you say that is a reality, whether one likes it or not. There is, let's be quite frank, no end in sight to his leadership, whether you like it or not. You reposted a piece from The Atlantic in which Hussein Ibish wrote, and I quote him here, "The grim reality is that the only people left in the world who seem to want the war to continue into the indefinite future are also the only ones who could stop it, the Hamas leaders and Netanyahu." You agree with that assessment, do you?
I do, but that does not necessarily imply that Mr. Netanyahu can survive this. I happen to think he cannot and will not. The next 45 days will be critical. He is facing both immense domestic pressures having to do with the conscription of ultra-Orthodox Jews into the military, from which they have been exempt for over 65 years, and also international pressure. Now that his coalition has shrunk to its extremist right-wing purified form, I don't think he can withstand this pressure. In terms of the war, I totally subscribe to what Hussein Ibish wrote. He and Sinwar find themselves in the odd, peculiar, and bizarre situation in which they are the only two actors in this game that refuse or are reluctant to end this war.
You've described Benjamin Netanyahu on X as, and I quote you here, dark, spurious, vile, reckless, clueless, and inept. You are not happy that he will be addressing Congress, I assume, in July. No. What do you believe he hopes to gain from that?
I stand by that. I stand by that post or tweet, as it was called. I think this is this epitomizes his behavior and his political personality. In terms of Congress, I think this is a very, very precarious and dangerous moment, because he's going to go there wanting to gain legitimacy and traction inside Israel to say, well, everyone talked about a crisis with the U.S. and confrontation. Look at me, here I am speaking to a joint session of Congress. But in that speech, he's going to do three things, Becky. He's going to attack implicitly or explicitly President Biden for trying to impose a Palestinian state on Israel, which is absolutely not true. He's going to raise the issue of Iran as an inter-civilization issue, which effectively overrides the Gaza issue, which is not true. And the third thing that he hopes to do is to further weaken Biden ahead of the November election by creating sympathy with the Republicans who are cynical enough to stand by him against the American president, and Democrats, many of which I assume will boycott the address.
It's good to have you. These are your views, of course. I've got to be quite clear about that. But I think your views perfectly well expressed by your ex, or as you rightly point out, formerly known as a post on Twitter. And, you know, your views help us, analyse and provide better insight into what is going on.